All right, now I wanted to go back to chapter 5 in Psalms, in Tehillim. So we talked last time about the first few verses, primarily just the first 3, in which we said that we said a whole bunch of things, but for one thing, we said that before praying, we have to pray to be able to pray. And you see this clearly from verse 2 and from verse 3. So I wanted to point out that in verse 2, it says, Amarei Hazina Hashem Bina Hagigi, to my words you should give ear to. Hashem, understand my thoughts, or consider, pay attention to my thoughts. So we, in this verse and in verse 3 as well, we see a kind of reciprocity where we're speaking and we want Hashem to listen. So it's talking about not so much the level of understanding, but kind of just starting to begin to pay attention and hearing something being said without it being internalized. At the same time, the bina, the meditation of the person, Hashem should meditate on that. So again, I'm sure you've heard about this in the past, but there's a concept of midah keneged midah, of measure for measure. So when a person thinks about God, so to speak, Hashem thinks about us. When we speak to God, Hashem listens. It's saying over here, you see the measure for measure to be, he speaks back to us, but the starting point of speaking back is hearing being spoken to. And we see that same thing in verse 3. The word used is hakshiva, which means to listen. L'kol shavi, to the voice of my cry. So last time we spoke about how that was a level of a really nullification and dependency before God. But on the other hand, the language of hakshiva, to listen, is not quite as high a level as the third verse, which we'll see in a second. But I wanted to point out that on verse 3, we also see that the psalmist, that David refers to God as Malki Velokai, refers to God as my king and my master. But he doesn't refer to Hashem with the 4-letter name, with the ineffable name. So it's interesting that in verse 2, when we're talking about understanding, that name is used. In verse 3, that name is not used. In verse 4, Hashem boker tishma koli, boker arach lacha v'atzapeh, again, the 4-letter ineffable name is used again, which is a name that refers to a certain extent to Hashem's essence, at least to how he reveres himself in a way that reflects self, to some extent. So it's interesting when we're referring to us thinking, in verse 2, we refer to Hashem's name, which would imply person meditating on God and thinking about his attributes, because that's what the name means. So in other words, the person, just by saying the name, is coming into focus Hashem's attributes, Hashem's nature, so to speak, at least with how he relates to the world, is being focused on, is being thought about, etc. So the person is deeply thinking about Hashem's reality, and Hashem, so to speak, becomes aware of him. We see the same thing in verse 4, Hashem, boker tishma koli. The idea of a boker, of the dawn or a morning. So the light begins to shine. So there's clarity. right? So again, there's this element of meditation, of David is meditating on God, thinking about his greatness as we referred to before, as how he's the creator, and how he vitalizes everything, and he's the only true source of being, etc. And he does this with a level of clarity. And then Tishma Koli, then Hashem hears. So it's interesting that the word Tishma, which is generally translated as hear, but it has a deeper meaning in Judaism. Many times in the 5 books, for example, in the Shema prayer, it says Shema Yisrael. We also say in the 2nd chapter of the Shema, V'haya im Shamoah, and if you will listen, and many times in Deuteronomy, there's a reference to Im Shamoah Tishma, if you will continually listen. This idea of listening is an idea of learning. It's an idea of knowing something, of retaining it. A Shema is a retention. It's something you hear, but you retain. So you understand it and you're retaining it. So verse 4 is a plea, a much, much deeper plea to Hashem than the previous verses, where David is contemplating about Hashem and Hashem's retaining, the effects of the prayer. So again, this is something we can all learn from. During prayer, or I should say as a preface to prayer, a person has to make time to meditate on Hashem's existence, meditate on Hashem's greatness, meditate on Hashem's moral truth, meditate on how everything is vitalized through Hashem's spiritual energy, and how Hashem hides himself humbly, so in order that we can have free choice and so that we can operate in the world. And then obviously from this springs forth this dependency and this yearning to be close to Hashem. And that, measure for measure, triggers Hashem's specific paying attention and retention of our pleas and our prayers. So now in terms of verse 4, the word boker is repeated twice. And the various commentaries about what this verse is talking about when it refers to a boker. It refers to morning or the dawn. Rashi says that boker, that is a time when the wicked are punished. That's what Rashi says. You can look it up. The wicked are punished in the morning, and he brings a verse that in the end of days, in the morning, the wicked are going to be punished. So it seems to be a time that is already primed for the wicked to be punished. And as we're going to see, the historical context here is David is going to war with his enemies. And so he's prays in the morning, and seems like he's going to go to war in the morning, which is a time of retribution against the wicked. And therefore, it's the right time for the prayer and the right time for the war. We also know that the Talmud in several places, and I think the Zohar also mentions this, that a boker refers to the days to come. Then in Daniel, there's a verse that says, Amar Shomer Asa Boker Bagam Laila. The guardian says that morning will come and also night. And the night is the exile, and the day is the redemption. In that case, the double language of Boker Boker may refer to the different stages of the redemption. But in terms of the words Boker, its implications is morning and dawn, its implications for us in our service of God, it's as I've said before, the word Boker refers to clarity, refers to mental and spiritual clarity. And that's the time, exactly as Rashi says, that we can take vengeance against the wicked. Who is the wicked? Our evil inclination. That's the real wicked. You know, Chassidus talks about how in this past week's Torah reading, it talks about the cities of refuge, and that if somebody murders by mistake, should go to the cities of refuge. So, who is this murderer, according to Hasidic and mystical thinking? That's a person's evil inclination. He's the murderer. It's really something profound we have to really think about and soak in very deeply. Is that the evil inclination, the Satan, he's a murderer. He's also a deceiver, right? He entices us to do things that are self-destructive. And the refuge, this is the Torah. This is a place of the Kohanim and Levim. The refuge is Torah study. This is what Chassidus teaches us. But I think that's very connected to this idea of morning and dawn, a time of clarity. We can get that clarity through Torah study. And we can overcome our enemies through Torah study. And also through prayer. So, in other words, from a Hasidic perspective, this verse could mean Hashem. That means meditating on God's greatness. Boker is meaning Torah study. Tishma Koli, that's prayer. Boker Erech Lecha Batzapeh brings greater clarity, and then Erech Lecha is I will arrange and assemble before you. That's another level of prayer. Batzapeh, and I will hope. In other words, and then I will be confident in overcoming the evil inclination. This is how we can interpret this verse in our everyday lives. So in other words, every day a person has to do these things. A person has to contemplate about Hashem's existence and Hashem's greatness and Hashem's will. Very important. About that Hashem's essence and the Torah, meaning that the moral reality of the Torah is one with God. And the Malbim here on this chapter talks a lot about that. He comments a lot that in the times of David, the nations all around believed in pagan gods like the Greeks, and I guess the Philistines were probably similar and the others, and that the gods were amoral and often immoral. And that the gods in their stories, that they did immoral acts, so adultery and murder, and so on and so forth, and that they also respected other heroes who did the same. And so what David, and actually this really leads into the next verse. In the next verse, the Malbim explains this, that God is not this way. But we can all learn this from the name of Hashem as well, from Hashem's name, because Hashem's name refers to Hashem's influence on the world, which comes through Torah. What I'm kind of saying is the words Hashem and Boker come together as one. They have to be together. Meaning to say the contemplation about Hashem's greatness has to go together with an awareness of Hashem's moral truth. It can't be separated. Under that circumstance, Tishma Koli, then Hashem will hear my voice. So another thing we said in our last class, that one of the things we're trying to accomplish during prayer is not just that Hashem should listen to our needs and not just praising Hashem, but raising ourselves up spiritually to reveal our neshamas, to reveal our souls through prayer, to raise ourselves higher, a bit to disconnect from the physical and make ourselves more spiritual beings. It seems to me that verse 4, when it talks about Tishma Koli, that Hashem will hear my voice, is referring to that voice, the voice of the neshama, that's trying to raise itself above the mundane and the physicality of the world. And as the Talmud tells us, this isn't something that a person can do on their own. This is something that we need divine assistance for. And that's why it says, Eroch lecha batzapeh. I will arrange this before you, and I will hope. By the way, again, this is a continuous ascension. So that we come to the phrase lecha, which is referring to God as in a face-to-face relationship. So we mention Hashem's name, we're contemplating him, but kind of like as an object looking in. But the lecha to you is a face-to-face. A face-to-face is not something that can be comprehended intellectually. It's something you experience. So after these levels of contemplation and Torah study and prayer, and then further prayer, then we come to the lecha. Then we get a bit of a revelation of our souls that have a relationship with God, and we feel something. We feel a certain inspiration. We feel a certain level of coming in contact with the divine. Of course, the word "and we hope" fits in beautifully with the interpretation that Boker is talking about the time to come. And it's saying that, in the future, in the time to come, you will hear our prayers. That's Tishma Koli. And the Erach Lecha, and I will arrange before you, is the sacrifices. Batzapeh means, and I'm hoping for this. So the psalmist is dreaming about the days to come, days of radiant prayer, days of beloved and accepted sacrifices, and he's hoping for that time. And we know that hoping for the time to come brings a little spark of that reality right now. As the Baal Shem Tov taught, the place that we want to be, what we really desire to be close to spiritually, that's where we are. So when a person really yearns for the days to come, there's a bit of that reality that comes into their life. Verse 5. Ki lo keil chafetz rasha ata lo yagurcha ra. And you are not a God that desires evil and wickedness. Evil does not sojourn or dwell with you. So here King David is starting to praise God. So we're getting to the next step. First, until now, where King David is praying that his prayer be heard. And now he's starting to praise God and his moral truth. And he's saying that God doesn't desire wickedness. So as I mentioned before, the Malbim explains this to mean that King David is juxtaposing God, sort of lahavdil, comparing him to the pagan idols and saying that you're not like them. You don't desire wickedness. No wickedness can exist with you. The Malbim actually explains the word yagurcha ra at the end of the sentence there, which is translated, evil does not sojourn or abide with you, as coming from a different word that means fear. meaning to say that Hashem is not afraid of evildoers, of those doing evil to him. Of course. So according to that, this verse is praising God as being the deity that wants nothing to do with evil and is completely separated from it. So, as I mentioned before in a previous lecture, that one way in which we empower and we bring God down, God's attributes into this world, is through praising him in regards to those things. So that's what King David is doing. He's going to go to war with the enemies of Israel, with the wicked. And so first he praises God as being an enemy of the wicked in order that to bring that attribute down into the world, that it should be activated. Now, in the beginning of the verse, it refers to God as Kel, Aleph Lamed, which refers to God as strength, as the actor in the world. And at the end of the verse, it doesn't mention that phrase. It refers to God as, it just talks about God without mentioning him by name. So the idea is this. The Ramchal mentioned this many, many times in his work of Derech Hashem, of the path of God. He says that all of the circumstances of the world, all the creatures in the world, all the events in the world, everything that happens is all exactly a precise set of steps and ingredients leading to God's final object. And so according to that, what King David is saying, even though sometimes there's evil that is permitted to happen in the world, but that's not what God really desires. In fact, that what appears to us as evil is a stepping stone to eventually leading to the end of days. So in its essence, and therefore, it's not even evil itself, because it's a prong bringing to Hashem's revelation and peace that's going to be in the end of days. It's going to bring to Amala Aretz De'ash Hashem. It's going to bring to a time where knowledge of Hashem will fill the world. And it's a necessary part. So because of that, looking at the big picture, it itself is not even evil, since it was necessary to bring about that end, even though we can't perceive that now. But that's the meaning, Kilo Kel Chafetz Rasha Ata. You don't desire wickedness. Hashem doesn't want there to be wickedness. In fact, Lo Yagur Chara. Before you, there's no wickedness. Even what appears wickedness to us, but in the truth of God isn't. The Baal HaTanya, Shnei Zalman of Liadi, of blessed memory, he says that really a person has to have this faith always. Since everything comes down from the higher worlds, comes down from before God's holy throne, and there's Lo Yagur Chara, there can exist no evil. Therefore, it must be that really it's not evil. It's just that we can't perceive it. So in other words, I often compare it to touching a flame. It's really it's warmth. It's something that can cook food for us, but if you touch it, you get burnt. So it's something that the world needs. The point is that it's too much good in a certain sense. It's a source of good that we can't comprehend. To us, it feels like not good, but in essence, we have to believe that it is good. So on the one hand, what we're saying is, of course it's painful. And who knows if even that pain is part of the good that we're talking about, that Hashem wants to bring about. A humility that's brought about, feeling of dependency, it's hard to say. But what the Baal HaTanya is simply saying is that we just have to stand by a simple faith of knowing that since everything stems from God, and He is all good, and if something comes about despite our best efforts that doesn't appear good to us, that it must be good. It's not just that it's for the good, but it is actually essentially good in itself. Then he goes on to say that if a person has this belief and he actually brings himself to a state of happiness and calm, that revealed good will certainly follow. Okay. Now in verse 6, one more thing about verse 5. The Midrash says that this verse is referring to tshuva, referring to repentance. You don't want wickedness, means to say Hashem doesn't want the wicked to remain wicked. He's ready to accept their repentance. Hashem is waiting, as the verses in Isaiah say, also I believe in chapters 55, 56, that Hashem is waiting for the wicked to repent. And that's the meaning. You don't want the wickedness. You're waiting for the wicked to turn into the righteous. Verse 6. Lo yisiatzvu holim leneged einecha, sanesa kopor oven. So fools cannot stand before your eyes. You hated all evildoers, all doers of wrong and harm. So we speak here about fools and doers of evil and wickedness. In regards to those fools, we say they can't stand before your eyes, O God. But in terms of the doers of evil, we say that Hashem hates them. So that's very different. What is the meaning of that? Fools can't stand before the eyes of God. So I believe that this is a reference to providence. When Hashem is, so to speak, looking at us, there's more a specialized divine providence for that particular person. And so when we're talking about fools, what are we talking about? So we're talking about people who don't believe in that providence. We're talking about people possibly who don't believe in God, and the King David and Psalmist is referring to them as fools. And therefore, measure for measure, they also are not, they are not dealt with by God with special providence, but just the normal rules of nature apply to them. And that's why they're not neged einecha, they're not before your eyes. Just as it says that the land of Israel, Eini Hashem Elokecha ba mereishis shana achris shana, that the eyes of God are upon the land of Israel from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. It's a reference to providence, a reference to Hashem's special attention, special beyond, in other words, that there is a type of approach to the Holy Land, particularly when the children of Israel live there, that is beyond the natural way, although it may be hidden. Similar, measure for measure, this is also how the fools are treated in the same way, is that they're left to the ways of the natural world, and there's no special providence for them. On the other hand, the evildoers, they're causing harm in the world, and therefore Hashem turns his attention to them to cause them harm. Just the opposite. Measure for measure. That's the meaning of God hates them. How do you behave with someone that you hate? There's an effect. There's in the communication, in behavior. Okay. Verse 7. Ta'abek dovei chazav ish damim umirma yisoyev Hashem. So you will destroy the speakers of deceit, a man of murder and lies. God despises. So I wanted to point out that Rashi here states that, who is this man of murder and deceit? He says this is Amalek and his children. So it refers to Amalek. I'd like to suggest that from a Hasidic perspective, that the Ish Damim Umirma refers to the evil inclination, as we said before. Who is this Ish? An Ish is someone important, right? An Ish is someone of stature, someone of thought, which is something, again, we mentioned that several times. But he's a murderer, and he's a deceiver. So who is this? This is the evil inclination. It's also something very important for us to constantly take with us, to realize that the impulses that we have that are against God's will, it's not that those are good for us, but God is so annoying, he doesn't let us do it, he's going to punish us. You know, he's like an annoying parent. It's not the case. Those impulses are harmful to us. Those impulses can bring us to our deaths. Because again, since God is the source of true life, the source of infinities, the source of all living things. So being closer to him is being closer to true life. Farther away is really closer to death, despite maybe immediate different results. And so that's so important in terms of us getting through tests on a regular basis. When we feel a certain impulse to do something that's against Torah, how do we overcome that? How do we overcome it? We just force ourselves by force of will. But this is a certain instruction. Here, the verse is telling us how to deal with this problem. If we look at those impulses as poison, if we look at them as things bringing about harm to us, something we have to stay away from, like an addiction, something that can really cause us harm, it's so much easier to reject it than if we look at it as something positive, something that brings us pleasure, that we have to just force ourselves because down the road, or because there is this parental figure that doesn't want us to do it, but we really want to. So it's an interesting contradiction. On the one hand, our sages tell us that a person should always say, truth is that I like eating bacon. I like doing things that are, that against God's will. But God said I shouldn't do it. So we find this in the words of the sages, that there's that approach, that a person shouldn't say, I'm not doing it because it's harmful. I'm doing it because it's against, I'm not doing it because it's against God's will. But on the other hand, I think there's another level on that, and that is that things that are against God's will are what are truly harmful. So there's three things. In other words, the first level is saying, don't keep kosher because it's a healthier diet. Those things are not, I don't enjoy them, they're disgusting or whatever. No, keep kosher because that's God's will. But now, tied together with that is the concept that the things that are against God's will, those are truly harmful to us, and those are things we truly have to stay away from. And so a person's Yetzer Hara should not be looked at as they themselves and things that they want to do, but as an enemy, a dangerous enemy from without that's really seeking to destroy us. And the verse says, Yasayev Hashem. Now Hashem is disgusted with the evil inclination, according to this interpretation. So in other words, what we're saying is that even though Hashem, it's the famous parable of the prostitute, that Hashem is instructing the prostitute to try to seduce his son, but that doesn't mean that the king really admires the prostitute. And similar over here, we also have to keep this in mind. King David was meditating on this idea that you, Hashem, are disgusted by the evil inclination. And so maybe this is what we have to do. I'm not disgusted by the evil inclination, but God, I know you are. You're disgusted by the evil inclination. And that in turn can make us also a little bit disgusted with it, but for the right reasons. Not because we ourselves don't agree with it, but because it's against Hashem's will. And again, in verse 7, we end off with Hashem's ineffable name. So I think it's very important to mention, because often we think that we get close to God by doing mitzvahs. By doing good deeds, by praying, by singing, by coming to a class, we get close to Hashem in this fashion, which is all true. I'm not saying it isn't true. It is true. However, often the more difficult parts are the prohibitions, the things that we're not allowed to do. Those are more difficult for us. Not, getting angry when that we're tempted to, not engaging in certain type of hedonist behaviors that maybe we like to do. Those are the really tough things, and with those things we can really sanctify ourselves deeply. And through those commitments and through those sacrifices, we become really close to God. So maybe that's the meaning of why Hashem's ineffable name comes after this verse, at the end of this verse. Because if a person internalizes the ideas of this verse, then they can come to a perception of the four-letter name. Then they can really come closer to Hashem. In verse 8, it says, "Vani b'roiv chazdecha avoy beisecha, shtachaveh el heichal kodshecha b'yirasecha." And I, through your abundant kindness, come into your house. I bow towards your holy sanctuary in awe of you. So it's interesting, a couple of things. First of all, we start, for the first time, David refers to himself, like there's a bit of self-awareness here. Vani, and I. The first time in the whole chapter that David refers to himself. And it's also the first time that David refers to God's great compassion and kindness. It says that he will come to Hashem's house through Hashem's great kindness. So, a couple of things. First of all, on the one hand, as we said before, David's recognizing that in order to, so to speak, get into God's house, in order to get into that state, as we said before, into the king's palace, person needs heavenly assistance. Person needs Hashem's compassion in order to get there. So in other words, you have to pray for that. That's a special assistance from Hashem to reach that, because we're down here. So that's one thing King David is saying. He's saying, Va'ani, even though we're separate, and I'm a separate being, and I feel myself separate, and I define myself as separate from you. I'm not fully, in other words, I'm not fully nullified to you. Still, through your compassion, I can come into your hell, to your house, into your transcendence. Then I can prostrate myself, nullify myself to your holiness in awe. So it's interesting. The beginning of the verse talks about compassion and kindness. The end of the verse talks about awe. So this might bring us to a different mitzvah. This might bring us to, first of all, contemplating about Hashem's great mercy in creating the world. When a person enters into, so to speak, Hashem's house, also a form of prayer, meditation, but also could be a reference to charity. Also be a reference to when a person thinks about how God brings life to everything in the world, and gives us our sustenance, how we too have to do the same for others, how we have to spread kindness and think of others just the same as he does. And through that, that's also another road, another pathway to come close to Hashem. And through that, and through that path, a person can come to a degree of self-nullification, humility, which that in turn, he can be granted the gift of the Yirasecha, of a great awe of Hashem falling over him and having a certain perception of the divine. Okay, one more verse. Hashem, nacheni b'tzidkasecha, v'man shorai hayishar l'fanai darkecha. Lead me, O Lord, in your righteousness, because of my watchful enemies, straighten your path before me. So it's a continuation again of this concept that I started talking about before, of charity. But let me get to that in a moment. I don't want to get off from the simple meaning of the verse before we get to the ethical teachings that it may have, and mystical teachings. But the simple meaning of the verse is that Hashem will direct me in his righteousness in order to protect me from my enemies, and he straightens before me a path. So the Malbim explains that what King David is saying here is that he is asking Hashem to open his eyes to Torah and proper behavior, and proper conduct, and making good decisions before he goes down the path. Before. So in other words, so that he shouldn't falter, and he shouldn't be ridiculed, and he shouldn't be criticized and pointed to by his enemies as a sinner and as a fool. So he's asking Hashem to open his eyes before he begins to walk down the path to the right behavior. Obviously, in order to accomplish this, there's the prerequisite of Torah study, that a person's mind should be filled with wisdom and the right values in order to know which paths to take. Now, but what can we take away from this verse? I see it as a continuation of verse 8. Hashem will lead me b'tzidkasecha. The word tzidkasecha can both mean tzedek, righteousness, and also tzedakah, and also charity. So through those two pillars of Torah study and charity, Hashem will lead the person on the right way, down the right path. It's key that a person should have both Torah study and good deeds to others. In fact, part of his charity should be to teach others. And that's a great way to end that. During the coming week, we should all make it our business, try the best we can in some way to teach others, whether by example, by our words, in order to spread Torah and its teachings in the world. Have a good week and a Shana Tova if I don't see you before Rosh Hashanah.